Hey there. In this video, I wanted to talk a little bit about camera shake. Now, you may have seen other videos where you put a noise modifier onto an object and it vibrates and shakes. But what I haven't seen is a way to control that. So in our gun simulation here, when we're looking through the gun camera, when the gun's firing, we want the gun to shake. But when the gun's not firing, we want the camera not to shake. So the trick is how do you turn on and off that vibration depending on what the gun's doing. And to do that, we need two objects, right? Because unfortunately, the noise modifier is not drivable directly. So in case you don't know how to create a noise modifier, so we create an object, anything will do. Create this cube, right? And then inside of the graph editor, and we need to have at least we need to have something keyframed on it. So I'm just going to right click and keyframe the location. You can only add the F-curve modifiers you can only add modifiers if you have at least one keyframe. So we have a keyframe. Let's choose the X location, and under modifiers you can say add noise, and you can see it adds a kind of a random jitter here. And we can do the same thing, say for the Z location, we can add noise as well. And then these parameters here, then you can change the strength of it, the scale of it. You can shift things out of sequence so that you're not repeating stuff, add some different seeds to it. The ultimate result here is you can see that you get jitter. The problem with Blender, at least, is none of this stuff is you can't put drivers on any of this stuff. Right? You right click, you see that you can't turn the stuff on and off. So once you set it, you can restrict a frame range. So you can do like a start and end. So if you wanted to kind of start and then run for a little bit and then stop, but that's not really tied into the model, right? We want everything keyed off whether or not the gun is firing. So we can't do it directly here, but we can do it a different way. So let me get rid of this guy. And like I said, it's going to take two objects. The first is I have this empty here in the middle, and this empty is parented to the gun, so that if the gun moves around, if I grab, let me just grab the gun here. You can see that empty is with the gun itself. All right. And this empty has a noise modifier on it. So I did with this empty exactly what I just did with that cube. I keyframed the X and the Z rotations, and then inside of the graph editor, I added noise modifier, and I set some settings so that the X and the Z noise were not the same, so they wouldn't get diagonal movement. You kind of get kind of a random jittery motion out of it, and then I scaled it to something that was appropriate for my simulation. So you can see how that little crosshair is vibrating. Now the next trick is to take the camera, and then we're going to do some parenting using constraints. So there's a child of constraint. So under constraints, you can add a child of constraint right here. And what this does is it lets you control whether or not an object is parented to something or not. So this first child of constraint here parents to this empty right here, this guy. So you can see here that this is called I've named this the jitter empty, and the camera, when this is activated, when this is on, is parented to the jitter empty, and when the jitter empty jitters, it's going to shake the camera. I have a second child of constraint that is parented to the breech of the gun, this thing here, which does not shake. And what happens is, depending on whether or not the gun is firing, I toggle between this parent and this parent. All right, so right now the gun is in the not firing position, right? Our switch is up, so the gun's not firing, so it's using this parent or this child relationship. So the camera is parented to a stationary object, so it's not going to shake. If the video goes to a point where the trigger's down, right, we play it, you can see that the child of constraint for the jitter has turned on, and the child of for the non-jitter has turned off. So it's just toggling between these two based on the position of the switch. And then that's just going to make the camera either jiggle when the gun fires or stay still when the gun doesn't fire. So we just take a look at one of those, we can look at those drivers. So we've seen some of this stuff before where we use the angle of the following gear, or the follower and the rockers, this angle here, combined with whether or not the gun is firing, which is this trigger. Like, so if you've watched the previous videos, you know what I'm talking about. If you haven't watched them, go back and watch them. So we're using the position of this trigger and this angle here to determine whether or not the gun is firing. So here we just say whether or not the gun has just fired. And remember, whenever we're looking at this angle here, always looking at whether the gun has just stepped into that cam. So basically what I'm doing here is I'm just looking for a couple of frames where the gun has fired, where I want to turn on the jitter. Right, it's going to return a 1 here, which is going to turn on the jitter, which is going to make the camera jiggle for a couple of frames. And it's also going to check to see whether or not the gun is actually in fire mode, which is the position of this switch. So it's looking at the position of the switch and where the gun is on this cam, as whether or not it's just fired or just maybe a couple frames after it's just fired. And that's all it does. And then there's another driver on for this guy that just basically does the opposite. Right, you can see that this one returns a 0, else 1. This one returns a 1, else 0. So within the same frame, they just flip back and forth. And that's how you can control the jitter of the camera. This other damped track here is simply just to make sure that the camera itself tracks towards the target. It's not really relevant to what I'm talking about now, because these are the only two you really need to turn the camera on and off. All right, I hope that was helpful if you're looking for a way to control whether or not your camera shakes or not, kind of in a easily modifiable and easily keyframed way. This video actually marks the end of the lessons in this video series. I hope you found something useful in the series. If you haven't watched the animated short I did to highlight this model, give it a look. There's a link below for the animation. If the series has been helpful, be sure to like and subscribe so you'll get notifications of new videos. Thanks for watching.